კიდევ ერთხელ გამარჯობა ყველას, მადლობა რომ ესწრებით შეხვედრას. დღეს ჩვენი სტუმარი იქნება და წამყვანი დღევანდელი საღამოსი ბრენდან მაქქარონი. პირველი დაახლოებით 30 წუთი იქნება განხილვა გლენმორანჟის, ასევე დეგუსტაცია, კონკრეტულად ლასანტას, კვინტარუბანის და ნექტარდორის და შემდეგ 10-15 წუთი გვექნება კითხვა-პასუხის რეჟიმში და შეგიძლიათ დაუსვათ ნებისმიერი შეკითხვა, თუ ინგლისურად კითხვის დასმა პრობლემა არის, შეგიძლიათ ჩეტში დაწეროთ შეკითხვა და ჩვენ გავაჟღერებთ შემდეგ ამ კითხვას. და ინგლისურად ხო? Hello, Brendan, one more time. Thank you for joining us for today's meeting. And we are ready. We have Glenmorangie bottles on our table and waiting for you to start the evening.
Sure. Well, thank you, Levan. Thank you for having me, and hello to everyone in Georgia. So, yeah, my name is Brendan McCarron. Levan, are you translating or is it all in English?
It will be in English.
It's in English.
Perfect.
It's going to be English.
Okay, so I am Scottish, so I will do my best to speak clear English. Talk really fast and roll our R's, but I'll go as slow as I can and try and be understandable. So,
Thank you.
Hey, I haven't done it yet. Only say thank you, Luca, when I've succeeded. There's no guarantee. Yeah, so as I understand it, we have 3 amazing Glenmorangies in front of you. So some of you have Glenmorangie Santa, some of you have Glenmorangie Ruban, and some of you have Glenmorangie Nectar. So what I propose we do, I'm going to introduce myself properly, then I'm going to tell you a little bit of the history of Glenmorangie, and tell you what it is we do, where we do it, and most importantly probably why we do it, what it is we're trying to do every day, every week, every month, every year to make our whiskies. And then during all of that, I'll also try and bring a little bit of how we make the Santa, how we make the Quinta, how we make the nectar, and what I taste in them when I taste them, what I'm looking for when I know it's right. And yeah, that basically is what I propose we do. But I would encourage you, so I can see everyone's being very well behaved and going on mute, but if you have any questions, just come off mute and ask me, just ask the question. Or if you're a little bit shy, that's okay. The chat function is below. I will write here, hello. Yeah, if anyone has a question and they don't want to interrupt me because they're trying to understand this weird accent, then just take the questions in the chat. The more interactive it is, the more it will be, and the easier it will be for me as well. So, yeah, my name's Brendan McCarron, and I've been working at the Glenmorangie company for 7 years. I've been working in whiskey for 15 years, which is, yeah, been a long time. It's went by like that. I still feel very young. I don't look young, but I still feel very young. And I feel like I've only been in the industry for a few years, but it's been 15 years. And in that 15 years, I've been a maltster. I've designed distilleries as well. I've been a distillery manager. I've been the manager of a group of distilleries. I've lived in Speyside. I've lived in the Highlands. I've lived on Islay. I've basically done every single part of making single malt whiskey. And for the last 7 years, I've been the head of maturing whiskey stocks at the Glenmorangie company. So what that means is I am one of the whiskey makers at the Glenmorangie company. My boss is Dr. Bill Lumsden, who is the master blender, the master distiller. And he hired me 7 years ago to be his eventual successor. So when Dr. Bill, who's been doing the role for 30 years, when he chooses to step down, which, you know, there's no plan for him to step down, but when he chooses to step down, the plan is for me to take over as the next master blender, master distiller, director of whiskey making. So that's why I'm here in front of you presenting these whiskies. So what I'd encourage first is, I'm going to be talking quite a lot. Trust me, you're going to need a drink. If you're going to listen to me me talking, you're going to need a drink. So just grab your glass of Glenmorangie. In Scotland, before we drink, we say Slangiva, which means to your health. So Slangiva, everyone. Get a drink.
Slangiva.
Slangiva, perfect.
Slangiva.
So when you're drinking your Glenmorangie, I'll give you a few things up front. It doesn't matter if you have the Lysanta, the Quinta, or the Nectar, what it should taste of. There's a few key things that make Glenmorangie super recognizable. So it should be delicious. That kind of goes without saying. It should be amazing and beautiful tasting, delicious whiskey. That's what we try to do. It should be sweet. And by sweet, it should be quite fruity. You're always looking for Glenmorangies to be quite fruity. They're also quite fragrant or floral. So fruity and floral are some of the real classics of Glenmorangie. The other word I'd say, which is kind of like an overused word in the whiskey industry these days, but it should be complex. And by complex, I mean it should have a lot of flavours. So there should be a huge amount of different things happening on your nose, on your palate, in the glass, in the colour. There should be lots going on as you drink this amazing whiskey. Whoa, something's happening to the screen. That's really weird. So, Glenmorangie is a Highland single malt Scotch. So what that means is we are in the very, very north corner of Scotland. So the northeast corner. It doesn't work in Zoom because my hands are, you can't see my hands, but we're up there, like up here is where Glenmorangie is. So it's up in the Highlands, up in the northeast corner of Scotland, north of Inverness, if anyone knows Scotland. It's about 4 hours from where I am right now, and we're in the Highlands. At Glenmorangie, there's three things that we do which make us unique. So there's lots of things we do that make us unique, but three things in particular. The first one is we use mineral water to make our whiskey. So at Glenmorangie, most distilleries in Scotland are going to use they're going to use soft water. They're going to use rainwater. I mean, if you could look outside my window right now, my window's just there. I'm in Scotland. The weather is terrible, always. So it's just raining right now. So all this rain turns into whiskey because you use soft water, and soft water makes amazing whiskey. But at Glenmorangie, we want to do things differently. We actually have spring water. So since 1843, when our distillery was built, we have been about 1 kilometre from a natural spring of water. It's called the Tarlogie Spring. When this water bubbles out of the ground, it's chalky and it's salty and it's mineral rich. So what that means is we have a unique water source, which is kind of important when you're making Scotch whiskey. Because when you make Scotch whiskey, you only have 3 ingredients: water, barley, yeast. So it's kind of important to have a unique water source. So this mineral, salty, rich water is the first thing that makes us different. So when we combine that with all Scottish malted barley, which we insist on using, and then when we add yeast, it means that our fermentation, so the fermentation process at Glenmorangie is kind of like an explosion of flavour. You know, it's super active, effervescent, alive, because the minerals allow the yeast to function really quickly. So what it does is it doesn't make any more alcohol than a different distillery, but it creates a huge amount of flavours. Flavours like, so it creates loads of acids and alcohols if anyone's a chemistry geek or scientific. But what it creates is flavours of white fruits. It creates flavours of citrus. It creates flavours of flowers. It creates flavours of cut grass. It creates all these fruity and floral flavours that you should find in whichever Glenmorangie you have in front of you. Now, after fermentation's complete and we have this malty, fruity, sweet, complex beer, there's one flavour in there that we don't really want. So we've created some oily, sulphury flavours through fermentation. It's just natural. It's just what happens when you make whiskey. So every distiller in Scotland wants to remove those heavier flavours, and you do it by using copper. You distill in copper pot stills to remove these heavier flavours. At Glenmorangie, we want to remove all of those flavours. Some of our competition want to keep a little bit of the sulphur in for some reason, they're crazy. We want it all out. So the way that we keep the spirit completely pure of sulphur, free of these unpleasant off notes, is we distill in the tallest copper pot stills of any distillery in Scotland. So our stills are huge. They are tiny in volume, but huge in height. They are something like 17 feet for just the necks of our stills. Same height as an adult male giraffe, if anyone is interested. Someone worked that out one time, and that's why the giraffe has become like an unofficial mascot or symbol of Glenmorangie Distillery. But these tall, giraffe-tall stills, what it means, huge amount of copper contact, means that you end up magnifying and intensifying and concentrating the fruity and floral aromas that we want by stripping away the heavy, oily, sulphury notes that were masking those flavours. So at the end of this, you end up with Glenmorangie Spirit. And the new make spirit, I was in work on Monday reviewing all of our new make spirits for the last 2 weeks. And when Glenmorangie new make spirit is perfect, it's of course fruity and floral and clean. But the main flavour I'm looking for, it has something like strawberries, something like peaches in it. It just is so crisp and so clean. So now that's two things: mineral-rich water to create all these flavours, the tallest copper pot stills to make sure you can find those perfect flavours. And then the third thing that we're famous for is our obsession with wood maturation and our desire to innovate with wood maturation, which brings us to the 3 whiskies in front of us. These whiskies are all wood-finished whiskies. So they've been matured in one type of cask, ex-bourbon, American white oak casks, for, like, say, the first 10 years of their life. All of them have been matured in ex-bourbon. But to make each of these whiskies very different in colour, this is where I'm trying to hold 3 whiskies at once. This never works. Pray for me. So you have 3 whiskies, all very different in colour, all very different. Oof, it's quite nice. All very different in aroma and all very different in flavour. The way that we've made these whiskies different is to put them into different casks to tease out and introduce different flavours. So let's start with La Santa. Who has La Santa? You see, Luca's got La Santa. A few other people. Irakil? Sorry, Irakil, I'm probably pronouncing your name terribly. I apologise.
Irakli.
Irakli.
Right.
I was very close. I was miles off. Irakli, sorry. You have La Santa too. So with this one, with La Santa, it's quite dark in colour. It's got a deep copper, almost brown colour tone to it. And that's because La Santa is our Glenmorangie that has been made using sherry casks from Spain. So this is La Santa right here. This is our 12-year-old, and it's 10 years in ex-bourbon and 2 years. It's finished for 2 full years in sherry casks from Spain. Now, we don't just use any sherry casks. We mainly use Oloroso sherry casks, Oloroso being a medium rich sherry. But to add a little extra texture and to add a little bit more refinement and some beautiful flavour, we also use Pedro Jimenez sherry casks. Pedro Jimenez being the richest and sweetest sherry that you can find in Spain. So about 25% Pedro Jimenez, 75% Oloroso, if you want to get technical. But most importantly, give it a little swirl, put your nose in here and see what you're picking up. And of course, take a drink, please. So there's a clue in the name. So La Santa is a Scottish Gaelic word, and it means warmth. So warmth or heat. So Lasanta is quite a spicy whiskey. When you use sherry casks and you use them to the right amount, you don't let it overpower. You're looking for all the kind of spices that we start to pick up in food around this time of year. You know, once it starts to get a little bit more like winter, you get more cinnamon and you get more red chilies and you get some star anise and you get some cracked black pepper. The other thing I love about this whiskey is the Oloroso sherry, especially the Pedro Jimenez sherry. You get flavors of milk chocolate in whiskey when you use these sherries. So with Lasanta, I get this spicy kick up front, but then I get an aroma, or sorry, a flavor of chocolate right at the beginning, but it runs right through the entire sensation of drinking the whiskey. As I said earlier, oh, I've actually got props here, which is completely unplanned, but I've just seen something here. So with Glenmorangie, it's very citrusy. Always Glenmorangie is citrusy. With Glenmorangie Original and with Nectar d'Or, which we'll taste soon, the citrus is quite bright. But when you use sherry, it kind of, everything intensifies. Everything gets a bit deeper. It gets a bit more meaningful. It becomes a bit more robust. So you're kind of looking at these kind of things that you see in cocktails, these dehydrated oranges. You get a lot of dried fruits like sultanas or raisins in there. Now, it's a very, very beautiful whiskey, but it is a sweet whiskey, but it's sweet in a particular way, especially when you compare Lasanta to Nectar d'Or, which we'll try later. Lasanta is sweet like brown sugar. You know, everything's a little deeper, so it's like muscovado sugar. It's like sweet things that have been caramelized in a pan with butter and have started to brown and blacken. There's toffee in there. There's treacle in there. It's all these incredible flavors. Maybe some like sort of sweet espresso coffee. So espresso coffee that's had some sugar, maybe just a little bit too much sugar added to it in there. So it's your whiskey, of course. So it's your choice how to drink it. I personally like to drink Lasanta just neat. I like to have it just neat with nothing in it whatsoever. But if you like that kind of peachy, apricot, classic style of Glenmorangie, if you add some water to Lasanta, the sherry notes will drop. So the sherry notes being the sultanas and raisins, the chocolate and the spiciness, it won't go away, but it might go down a little. And with water, you'll actually bring out more of the house style, more of the distillery character of Glenmorangie. So you'll get a little bit more of the apricot, a little bit more of the peach, and a little bit more of that sort of lighter sweetness, like white sugar sweetness, perhaps, will come out. But it's your choice. So if you're lucky enough like me to have all three whiskies, I'm going to keep some Lasanta to go back to. I'm now going to move on to Quinta Ruban. So this is our Quinta Ruban. Now, Tia, I don't know, is the new packaging in Georgia yet, or is it? Yeah. So this is the new Quinta Ruban. This whiskey's been around for a long time, but it's for a long time been a 12-year-old single malt from Glenmorangie. But just recently, it's become a 14-year-old single malt. I said it used to be in black packaging, and now it's in green and white packaging. So if anyone there is a football or soccer fan, you'll know that I'm Glaswegian, so I'm a big Celtic fan, Glasgow Celtic. So it's got very Glasgow Celtic packaging. I wish that was my choice, but it wasn't. But what this whiskey is it's Glenmorangie matured for the majority of its life in ex-bourbon barrels, say something like 10 to 12 years in ex-bourbon barrels. And then to make it up to 14, it spends its last few years in port casks from Portugal. So we use Ruby port. Now, if anyone out there is a port drinker, Ruby port isn't the best port that you can get. You know, there's tawny port and vintage ports, which are better. But the ruby port, we used it deliberately because it just goes with Glenmorangie so well, and it creates a whiskey, a Scotch that's just so interesting, and it creates these flavors that we love. The other thing it creates that I absolutely love, I'll try and get out the way, but it's the color of Keen to Ruban. It's like pink and orange and purple. It has all these incredible colors to it. Quite unique again for a single malt. Port. Oh, well, that might be a question. But it comes from the port. So it comes from the port casks that we use that give the colour that you're looking for. So who has Quinta? Whoever has it, hold it up. David, Vaso, a few others. Levan has it. So slange it, everyone. This one's a little higher in alcohol. So the Lasanta was at 43. This one is at 46. So it's only a small amount, but the reason we've made it a little higher in alcohol, it's just it works for the flavour. It just makes the port and the whiskey talk to each other in a better way, we feel. So with this one, amazing colour, first of all. Yeah. I really love this whiskey. I'm a huge Keen to Ruban fan. So you're looking for, it's like dark chocolate. So you get this incredible dark chocolate aroma. It fills up your nostrils, this high cocoa, high quality dark chocolate aroma. But again, of course, it's a Glenmorangie. It's also fruity. So you've got black currants, blackberries, blackcurrant flowers almost. And there's something else in there that I can't quite put my finger on right now. But take a sip. So it has, oh wow, this is so good. It has this sweetness, almost like honey. Is anyone getting that? But it's you know, there's honey in every whiskey. Frankly, every Scotch has a honey flavour to it. It comes from the wood. But this is, it's like a deep, thick, intense, sticky honey flavour. Almost like wild honey or Manuka honey or something like that. And I've just taken another little sip there. And you get this, if you're lucky enough to pick it up, only some people pick it up, not everyone. But after you've drank it, there's almost this feeling of it like cooling the mouth. You know, it's fresh and clean. And it's almost like mint. So these are the big flavours for me of Quinta. You get this dark chocolate. You get this more substantial, thick honeycomb honey. And then this beautiful, fragrant, minty or eucalyptus top note that comes through at the same time. Now, I love Quinta neat. That's one way that I drink Keen to Ruban often. But if you want to, all whiskies change when you add water. With the Keen to Ruban, the change is quite dramatic. It really, just a few splashes of water, and it really does turn into a different but just as incredible whiskey. So I'm going to put a few drops of water in here. And what you're going to find is it's going to go floral. It's going to become very floral, very fragrant, very perfumed. You're going to still get the blackcurrant. You're going to get less of the honey. But you'll get, yeah, just it's almost like lavender honey that it's become. You get lavender. You get some herbs like basil and rosemary. It's almost just like a smell of being outside in the summer, you know, being around grass and flowering branches and bushes. Some roses and carnations in there. But as you sip, you still get that. I think it's actually become thicker and oilier with water added, which I know doesn't really make sense. It's kind of counterintuitive, but you've brought more of the oils and more of the flavours out of the alcohol, and they're now right there in the glass for you to pick up. is anyone, so I don't know what people are like, does anyone here make cocktails with single malt? Because I bet most of you don't, but if you like an old-fashioned, super traditional cocktail, probably my favourite cocktail in the world, for me, Quinta Ruban makes the best old-fashioned you have ever had, especially if you can get your hands on some orange bitters. So orange bitters, Quinta Ruban, simple syrup, and an orange peel. It is an amazing
I'll give it a try.
Yeah, give it a try, please. And you will not regret it, Luca.
Yeah, I love old-fashioned, so I'll give it a try.
I'm like an old-fashioned nut. I've been lucky enough to try them pretty much all over the world. I've had some incredible ones. I've had some terrible ones. But Quinta Ruban, orange bitters, heaven. I'd also say people have found it quite cool that since we've upgraded the Quinta, people are asking, well, it used to be a 12-year-old, why is it a 14-year-old? I'll be completely honest, it's because this is what whiskey drinkers wanted. We used to make we make a 10-year-old Glenmorangie, and we used to make 3 12-year-old Glenmorangies. Then the next age was 18, and people wanted to know, what does Glenmorangie taste like between 12 and 18? So we loved the 12-year-old Quinta, and we have done our best to make the 14 taste every bit as amazing as the 12, while being even more appealing, because that's what people want. And we've also kept the price pretty much the same. So this has been a huge hit. This has been, I've made more batches of Quinta Ruban this year than I thought I would make in 2 years. It's just been, it's been seeing people through the crazy year that 2020 has been. Yeah, I've just gone back to my La Santa. La Santa is all milk chocolate and currants and spice. And then the Quinta, because I've added water, it's dark chocolate, but flowers and sweetness. So the the last whiskey that we have to try together is called Glenmorangie Nectar. So Nectar is one of this range of 3 wood finish whiskies, and this one's a little bit different and a little bit sort of more. It's rarer. It's one that we make in much smaller amounts, and it's because of the casks that we use. So for Nectar, this is a very sweet expression of Glenmorangie, a dry and sweet expression of Glenmorangie using Sauterne. So Sauterne is it's a very different, it's a very sumptuous, very decadent dessert wine from Bordeaux in France. So some Sauternes are the most collectible wines on earth, like Chateau Yquem. So we use Sauterne casks to make Nectar d'Or. Now, there's 2 things very important about Sauterne casks. I always say there's 2 things very important, and then I list 5 or 7 or 10 things because my mind wanders. But with the Sauterne, so we're using Glenmorangie whiskey, which is already quite sweet and very delicious and quite decadent. So there's a risk by using Sauterne, which is extremely sweet and extremely decadent and extremely sumptuous. There's a danger that it could just become sweet and nothing else. But the Sauterne casks are actually made of French oak. So every whiskey we've tasted so far is an American oak. French oak is very tannic. French oak is very spicy. French oak can have you need to be careful with French oak in whiskey, basically. It can add structure and it can add flavor and it can add spice. But if you're not careful, it can go too far and it makes whiskey astringent and unpleasant and it can overwhelm a whiskey. This is why the Sauterne casks that we use work for Glenmorangie, but it takes a lot of skill to get it right, because we take 10-year-old Glenmorangie, put it into this Sauterne casks, and also I'm trying to buy about 2,000 Sauternes casks every year, and I never get them. The closest I've got is I maybe buy 1,100, but some years I only get 800, some years I only get 700, because they are made in such small amounts. It's really tough to get my hands on. And also these casks are some of the most expensive casks that I buy each year when I'm buying all the different casks that I need to make my whiskies. So it does make the Nectar d'Or something of a labor of love. But what happens when these casks arrive at site, we put 10-year-old whiskey into them, and you start to get intense sweetness coming from the wine that's still coated in the cask. But at the same time, the tannins and the French oak and that type of oak, it starts to add structure and it starts to dry. So the two things are happening at the same time. The whiskey is becoming sweeter and sweeter and sweeter, but to keep it balanced, it's becoming drier and drier and drier. So it's this perfect balance of dry and sweet that is the Glenmorangie Nectar d'Or. This is also at 46%, just like the Quinte Ruban, because we kind of, if we did it at 40, for example, it's a little bit too sweet. We want it to be sweet and delicious, but we want you to remember that you're drinking a single malt Scotch. So that's why we put it at 46. So whoever has Nectar d'Or, who has Nectar? Vasso and David have 2 at least. Nice. Slanjiva? So right up front, you should get a huge amount of, it's almost like vanilla ice cream. You should get vanilla ice cream, and then it's vanilla ice cream that's had a vanilla pod added to it. That's had someone grate a lemon over it. So you get lots of that kind of bright citrus shredded lemon peel. Glenmorangies are very fruity. And whenever I drink Glenmorangie Nectar d'Or, in my head, I'm very visual. I picture all the fruits, the apples, the pears, the peaches, the apricots, all these fruits getting cut into slices and laid out on a sheet and baked in an oven. Everything has started to caramelize and intensify as you sip this whiskey. It's also quite, you get a nice amount of, it's like a drizzle of syrup or some very light and sweet honey in there. I just took another sip there. And I also get always with Nectar d'Or, I get white chocolate. I get this kind of creamy white chocolate flavor. Don't get it on the nose, but I get it when I drink. But now that you've drank the whiskey, can you kind of feel on the back end, there's a little bit of heat. There's a little bit of warmth. There's a little bit of spice at the back end of Nectar d'Or. So up front, it's extremely sweet and very light and very easy. But at the end, it has a bit of, in Scotland we say oomph. It has a bit of oomph. It has a bit of strength. It has a bit of backbone right at the end. And that's the French oak. So it's these tannins that come through as structure, as dryness, as spice. So to me, I always in my head think of Nectar d'Or as a perfect little slab of white chocolate with just a little sprinkle of white pepper on top. That's my kind of flavor profile that I get in my head every time I drink Nectar d'Or. If you like water in your whiskey, be careful. You can add water to Nectar d'Or, you can, but be very sparing. If you add too much water, it just becomes sweet. And, you know, sweet's nice, but that's not what we want. We want a range of flavors. We want all these delicious layers to come through. You don't want just to be sweet. You know, that's American whiskey or something. Oh, shouldn't say that. Shouldn't criticize. But we want it to be flavorful and beautiful. So a tiny, tiny bit of water. No more than that. Just the tiniest dash. You want to keep it slightly spicy, but if you put that water in, way more of the white chocolate, almost like lemonade, like real lemony, beautiful citrus coming through. A little bit of that honey that we talked about before. Almost like creme brulee. You know, that sort of burnt sugar on the top of a really well-made creme brulee. That starts to come through as well. Now again, Luca, back to Luca with my fellow old-fashioned fan. This also makes an amazing old-fashioned. You do it with a lemon peel rather than an orange peel. And very, very, very little bitters, like 1 dash of bitters. Even that's probably too much, half a dash of bitters. This one's fantastic, really fantastic, but my favorite is still the Quinta.
I have Quinta as well, so I'll give both a go.
Nice, nice. Do the compare and contrast. You know, and if you prefer Nectar, that's okay. You're wrong because Quinta's better. But if you prefer it, it's okay. But you're wrong. Quinta's better.
Okay.
For me, the water is okay with Quinta Ruban, but not for the Nectar d'Or.
Because is it because it's too sweet after? David, is it because it becomes too sweet after with the water?
No. It's losing its character. I mean, Nectar d'Or.
Yeah, I agree.
With water. But Quinta Ruban is very intense, and for me, it must be. It should be added with drops of water. Quinta Ruban.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. This is so important. This is why sometimes people say, "Oh, I always add water to my whiskey," and I go, "Do you only drink one whiskey?" And they go, "No, I drink lots of whiskeys." Well, be careful. You know, sometimes add water, but other times maybe it's better as it is. You don't follow blindly one rule. You know, so it might not work. Vaso, were you going to ask a question there? Or did I cut you off?
As I know, years ago you were working for Oban.
Mm-hmm.
So some kind of way this Nectar d'Or's character, it's a little bit similar to Oban. Why?
So
for me,
two things for me.
Yeah.
For me personally, two things. Oban is very citrusy. So Oban always has that. It's not quite bright orange, but it's orange peel. That's a classic Oban note. And then the other thing is the tannins in Nectar, which I describe as like white pepper, but it could also be thought of as like freshly cracked salt.
Mm-hmm.
And Oban, that kind of maritime, you know, a little bit salt and pepper dusting. I think it's those two things that make the two whiskies quite similar.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question.
Oban's also a classic.
I have a question about Nectar d'Or. That must be one of the most popular question about Nectar d'Or. Why did you remove the age statement from the bottle? And we know that when Nectar d'Or was 12 years old, first 10 years it was aged in bourbon casks and then finished in Sauternes casks for the last 2 years. Now, after it became Ness whiskey, what's the youngest whiskey in the bottle, and what's the proportions of bourbon and Sauternes in the bottle?
Yeah, so I'll answer it back to front. So it's hard for me to communicate when you make a whiskey non-aged. It's hard to communicate, but what I can tell you is the recipe has not changed. So I can say it like that, and that should be all. We have not changed the recipe of Nectar d'Or. Now, then you go, well, why would you make it non-aged? So what we used to have is 3 whiskies side by side. You had La Santa, 12. Then you had Quinta, 12, slightly more expensive. Then you had Nectar, even more expensive, and all were 12. And this led to some confusion. So people would say, why is the Quinta more, cost more? We make it in smaller quantities and all that kind of stuff. And then they would say, well, why is the Nectar? It's also a 12. Why is it even more expensive? Nectar is expensive not because it's 12 years old. Nectar is expensive because the Sauternes casks are very expensive to purchase and we can only use them once. So that's why Nectar is the most expensive and La Santa is cheaper. Now, the other thing we had going was people wanted to taste a whiskey that was 12 years old, and we had 3 of them, and we had an 18 years old, and people could taste that as well. People wanted to taste something that was in the middle of these 2 age groups, and it was the Quinta Ruban that worked. So when we tried to make La Santa 14, too much sherry, we lost the balance. We tried to look at making Nectar 14, too much tannins, too much dryness, almost astringent. So we're still looking at ways to make Nectar older, but there's no promise. It was Quinta that made the most sense. It made the most sense at 14. But now we had this problem of 12-year-old La Santa, cheapest, 14-year-old Quinta Ruban, slightly more expensive, and then 12-year-old Nectar d'Or, even more expensive. So we figured that was going to cause confusion in the markets. So eventually the only solution we could come up with was, although we have not changed the recipe of Nectar d'Or and have no plans to change the recipe of Nectar d'Or, we just decided Nectar d'Or, what makes it special is French oak Sauterne casks. So just take the age off it and it makes it a clearer whiskey to talk about to people. So that's why we did it.
Yeah, thank you. And one more question. What was the strangest experiment you made with the casks? What type of cask did you use and what was the result?
Well, so most of the experiments I'm doing right now haven't finished. So they're a secret and I'll tell you about them when they're ready. But 2 very strange ones. We used some Brazilian cherry oak. Sorry, Brazilian cherry wood. So it's not oak. So therefore it's illegal. So we couldn't use it to make Scotch whiskey, but we wanted to see what are these other woods like. So we used Brazilian cherry wood, very thick, very aromatic wood. And we put some Glenmorangie into it. And the end result was a Glenmorangie that was absolutely disgusting, almost undrinkable, horrible stuff. It stuck to your mouth, yeah. Had to like scrape it off your tongue. It was horrible. So that was an experiment which was great to do because it let us know, let's never use Brazilian wood again because it's awful. But it was a very funky, different experiment. And then maybe one other, this was on Ardbeg, so I also make Ardbeg as well as Glenmorangie. But with Ardbeg, we put some whiskey into space in little test tubes that simulated being in a cask. And only 2 people got to drink the whiskey that had been in space. So, of course, my boss, Dr. Bill, and me, I got to drink it. So that was pretty cool as well. So I got to drink whiskey that had been in space, which was a pretty funky experience as well. The rest of them, I'm doing lots of experiments. I've got lots of cool ideas. I've got lots of amazing suppliers. We have lots of money given to us by the company to buy crazy things and do crazy stuff. And also, do I have my phone here? We are building, we're building something at Glenmorangie that is set up to let me do lots of crazy experiments. If my internet allows, please. So at Glenmorangie right now, we're building that tower.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, so that's my baby. I've been working on this for 5 years now, and it's almost ready. And it's going to let me do all sorts of crazy experiments, all distillation experiments. So, yeah, watch this space.
So it's going to be even taller distillation pod, or?
They're going to be the same size, but...
Really?
If you want,
I can
make them smaller and I can make them taller. That's all I'll say. I've figured out a way to be smaller, fatter, thinner, wider.
So I have a question.
I have a question. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. My question is all about the 12 years old Quinta Ruban versus 14 years old. For example, what's your experience and what's your preference? What's differentiated for you? I'm talking about your personal experience.
Yeah.
Like
so I'll be completely honest. When the proposal was first made, we have to make something that's older So something that's 14 or 15 years old because that's what people want. And it was true that's what people wanted. I was quite resistant to it because I love La Santa 12-year-old. I love Nectar d'Or 12-year-old. And I love Quinta 12-year-old. I love them all. So I didn't really want to change it in the first place. Now, the reason that we picked Quinta to make older, which is probably my favourite of the three, so changing that was quite, you know, heart-wrenching for me and quite tough to do. But the reason we chose Quinta is it's very similar. It's very, very similar. The 14 to the 12 is very similar. And hilariously, I'm seeing people saying, no, I tried the 14 and I tried the 12 and they're different. And I'm going, yeah, but which batch of the 12 and which batch of the 14? You know, every batch of whiskey is slightly different always. So all the 12 batches are slightly different. All the 14 batches are slightly. But anyways, my preference is probably the 14 because the one thing that changed that we couldn't stop, but it's something that I like is, and it's nuanced, like very, very nuanced, very slight, but it's slightly more dark chocolate and it's slightly more of that kind of bitter orange citrus note in the 14. But the differences are tiny because we worked super hard to make sure it still had that big flavour of dark chocolate, that big hit of wild honey and that minty eucalyptus finish. So they should be very, very, very similar. And the change in the recipe, it used to be strictly 10 years in bourbon, 2 years in port. Now it's some is 10 years in bourbon, 4 years in port. Some is 11 years in bourbon, 3 years in port. Some is 12 years, 2 years in port. Some is 30 years, 1 year in port. And that's how we balance off the flavour so that it doesn't get dominated.
I have read an interview of yours where you were talking about the like magic process of whiskey making when you choose casks and you don't know what you get in the end, and it's a risky process and so on. But anyway, don't you think that future of the whiskey making is, will be anyway the procedure of chemistry when we exactly know what we get in the end? You said it will be the end of the whiskey, but you know, marketing doesn't like to take risk. So what is the future of whiskey making?
True. So you will never, ever get to it being fully scientific. So I'm a scientist, so I'm an engineer. So I'm a chemical engineer. So I did chemical engineering at university with a focus on chemistry. But the reason it will never be completely and utterly controlled is it's a variable process. So you use yeast, which is a living thing. You use barley, which is a living thing. You use water. Water is not living, but it varies, you know, season to season, year to year. You ferment in batches that are not temperature controlled. So if you have an unusually warm day or a cold day, there's all these variables. And then we mature it in casks, which until they are cut down are living things. So there's all these variables that happen in whiskey. So we can understand it better. We can make it more consistent, but we will never get it super consistent. But in terms of what's the future, a lot of the innovation and experimentation in whiskey has been casks up until now. But into the future, it will continue to be casks because there is so much that we haven't done, but way more is going to be distillation. So that means that we all have to be a wee bit more patient, because if I do a distillation experiment today, you won't hear about it for 10 years minimum, because that's how long it takes Glenmorangie to be ready, really. Okay, maybe 7 years, maybe, but 7 to 10 years you have to wait. Whereas if you do a cask experiment, it might be ready in a year or 2 years. But you can do both. And then once you unlock some of the spirit-led innovations, it opens up new casks that you can start to use as well. So it's kind of like, it's not like the future is distillation experimentation and cask experimentation's finished. It's more like it's a new it's a new block. It's opening up a new avenue to experiment in. So yeah, future's bright.
Okay. Final question here. First of all, thanks for interesting talk here. And my question is regarding your favorite whiskies out of, not from your distillery, let's say so.
Yeah, so quite a few. David's already said I used to work at Oban Distillery. Now, before I worked at Oban Distillery, it was one of my favourite whiskies because it was the first whiskey when I was starting to get into whiskey, and my father was the big whiskey drinker. It's the first whiskey where we kind of met, you know. So he was big smoky, and I was starting going all around the place, and we just both kind of clicked one night over a bottle of Oban, and we drank most of that bottle of Oban actually in one night. So it's quite cool that about 5 years later, I was the manager of Oban, and then and once you work at a distillery, and that history is around you all day long, it's impossible not to fall in love with it. So Oban, absolutely. I lived on Islay for 3 years. One of the reasons I joined this company. So I loved Glenmorangie for forever, but I loved Ardbeg. I also love Lafroig and Lagavulin. Those three whiskies, if you bring me any of those three whiskies, I'll kiss you on the mouth. So be careful, everyone, if you bring me it. Fan of Highland Park. So Highland Park is a competitor, and I have no attachment to them. I've not lived near them, but I'm a huge fan of Highland Park. And then again with blends, you know, I love Johnny Walker, in particular the old Johnny Walker Gold Label 18-year-old. I thought that was magically put together blended whiskey, really special. And then the other one is I get to go to America quite a lot just with my job, but also previously I've lived in America and I've many friends still there. So I really like bourbon as well. So there's certain bourbons that I love. I don't really like rye. I can appreciate rye. I can appreciate it, but I don't think I'm ever going to love it. Whereas bourbon, you know, I'm a big fan of bourbon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have one question.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about, like, you release a lot of new products all the time. So I'm wondering where marketing aspect of it, so the research and like the feedback from the customers and your light bulb moments meet. So how these new products are released? Like maybe you can use examples of Ardbeg Enua or Glenmorangie, A Tale of Cake, or whatever you want, but like how they're produced.
Yeah, well, Tale of Cake's a good example. So with Taylor Bills, my boss, and the whiskey creating team, we sit down from time to time and we just brainstorm. We just try and come up with ideas. So some of them will be, like honestly, sometimes will be, I was reading about this winery and they make this very different wine. So let's just make it up. Like in Georgia, this new person has started a winery in Georgia and they're making one that is distinctly salty and smoky, for example. So if we heard about that, we'd go, that sounds kind of like Ardbeg, you know, that sounds like Ardbeg. Get in contact with people, try and get our hands on some of their casks. If it's different, if it's unusual, and especially if you get speaking to the people and you like them and you love the way that they think, you think, this could really work. So you get those casks in, you don't know what's going to end up. It might be brilliant, it might be terrible, but you give it a go. That's one inspiration. Another inspiration is things that we see in the food world or things that we see in completely in, or they're doing something around high strength or low strength. That's another idea that we have. But Tale of Cake in particular, that was a weird one because it's a way that we innovate sometimes, but it's unusual. And we genuinely were talking about just what makes you happy, what makes you smile, what puts a smile on your face. And one thing that we started thinking about is, you know, that time sometimes you have a meal and at the end of the meal, they bring out the dessert menu, especially at lunchtime, and they say, do you want something sweet? And you always say, no, I need to go back to work, or no, I need to get home. But just every so often, one person goes, yeah, I'll take a look. And then you end up just getting like something sweet, something like a bit of cake, something that tastes amazing. And you try it and you're just like, wow, and it just puts a smile on your face. That was our idea. So we actually started to say, right, what would this whiskey, if it was this whiskey, if it was a piece of cake in a glass, what would it taste like? And we actually wrote out our tasting notes. We wrote out what colour it would be. We wrote out how it would smell. We wrote out how it would develop. We wrote out our tasting notes. And myself, Gillian in the team, and Dr. Bill, we wrote out all these notes. And then we put it together. And then we went, so we actually had the final tasting notes for the whiskey before we even had a whiskey that existed. And then we went, how can we make that? And with that, we bought lots of different casks. I personally thought some Burgundy red wine might get there. And I also thought some Californian Pinot Noir style red wines would get us there. So we started that experiment. But Dr. Bill had worked in the past in the 1990s with Tokaj Hungarian casks, similar but different to the Nectar door. And so we used those casks. And that is what eventually, as the whiskey developed and we kept sampling it and going, oh yes, it's going in the right direction, but it's not there yet. And then eventually one day we nose tasted, started to write out tasting notes, and then we looked at it and we're like, this looks like exactly what we had in our head 4 years earlier. So
it's amazing.
We basically went to the marketing team and said, this is it. This is what you're doing. And this is cake in a glass, we called it. And then they turned it into a tale of. So yeah, so inspiration comes from everywhere. Ideas come from everywhere. I guess the trick is we're never just working on one whiskey. Because if you're working on one whiskey, just one experiment, whether it's good or bad, you have to release it. So we don't do that. We work on 5 or 10, and you know, some come good, some aren't ready yet, and you just constantly keep innovating, just keep going.
Which glass do you prefer? This one?
I think the one that's got the most whiskey in it is the one that works for me. Honestly, some work, some don't, some have preference. As long as it's wider at the bottom and it has a pinch at some point, it'll work, is what I'd say. As long as it is wide and it has a pinch. For nosing, for drinking, I mean, these are great because a tumbler's great. These are beautiful and amazing, but they break very easily. So yeah, as long as it has a pinch if you're nosing. If you're drinking, just get it in a glass and enjoy it, is all I would say.
Nosing, this shape is good for me. Very good.
It's just habit and getting used to it, you know. But yeah. So Levan, I'm sorry, but I have to leave you right now, but I just want to say thank you for having us, and I hope everyone's enjoyed. I hope you've enjoyed your whiskeys.
Thank you, enjoyed.
Please, if you have any more questions or anything, if you're on Instagram, you'll find me on Instagram, or if you're on LinkedIn, you'll find me on LinkedIn, or ask Tia and she can send your questions to me. It's no problem. But yeah, thank you very much for having me, and Slanjiva.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you so much.
Brendan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Very welcome. Stay safe, everyone, and let's do this again.
Bye-bye.
Let's do this again soon.
Many
See you
thanks.
in Georgia one day.
Oh.
Definitely.
Waiting for you.
You're always invited.
I'll be there.